good afternoon. Thank you all for coming here. Thank you for your interest in invasive species. Thank you for coming in out of a beautiful Sunday afternoon to hear about this very depressing issue. But there will be some good news tucked away in all of this, I think. First of all, especially that there are things we can do. So I will be talking about a number of things in my, what do I have, an hour? Oh wait, I'm compressing my hour into 10 minutes. Okay. So I'm actually talking about three things here that will lead into this wavy leaf grass that I want you all to leave here knowing about and remembering and taking one of these fact sheets that I have on the back table in the back left corner there and getting to know this plant, and if you find it, kill it. And then report it and let me know where you found it. So first I want to talk about what are invasive species. This is something that can get a little murky. It seems very evident at first, but the more you talk to people in different situations, in different contexts, it gets a little muddy and murky. So I want to talk about what are invasive species. Is this an invasive species? How do you know?
There aren't very many.
It's protected.
Yeah, there's not very many.
Well, is it native?
Yes.
Native. How do you know? I haven't said where we're talking about. So to talk about a native species or to talk about an invasive species, you have to know where you're talking about. And today we're talking a lot about, I think, Nelson County, right? So what's invasive in Nelson may not be what's also invasive in Maryland or New York or South Carolina or the West Coast. So you always, in the end, really need to be specific about where you are and what you're talking about, native versus invasive. So our eagle, yes, native to this whole red area. I don't know if you can see that very well, but all or much of North America, a native. What about this? This native?
No.
Where am I talking about? Simon didn't say. In Virginia, is this a native species?
No.
So in Virginia, is this a native species? No. But do these roam in wild packs through Shenandoah National Park? No. No. So it's an introduced species, but we would not call it invasive because it depends on human beings for its continuance, right? And they don't escape and roam the highways, fortunately. But they're all derived from this wild beast, the auroch, that's actually now extinct. Went extinct in the 17th century. It was originally from Eurasia, this whole big red area here. There are a couple other species of domestic cattle that come from northern Africa and southern India. But all our cattle come from that one beast. We brought them over intentionally, right? Because we wanted to get away from the old country, but we wanted to have the steaks. We didn't want to have the other things there. What about this creature, a honeybee? Is this native?
Not native.
Not native. Is it invasive?
No.
Nobody that I know complains about honey and honeybees. And in fact, now we're very concerned about pretty much all our pollinators, right? So once upon a time, though, pretty much from the Mideast all the way into Asia, but now this shows you their global range. We've taken them everywhere. Human beings have intentionally moved them everywhere in the world. So, an invasive species, what about, I don't know if you can see this picture. Can you see this picture? All right. So, this is a lot of vegetation. And there's basically two species here, and one of them is dead. But the green, can you see the green? Can you tell what that is? Kudzu, yes. So kudzu is having a strong impact on the forest here, right? Strong impact. It's covering it over and basically killing it, right? Yes. And kudzu, where did it come from?
It was brought by us.
It was brought by us from China, Japan, somewhere over there. And so introduced, and it escaped cultivation. We brought it here on purpose. And the agency that brought it here had to change their name. I won't mention them because they're actually here, so I'm not. But they're no longer called that and they brought it here intentionally with other plants. They were hoping to stabilize soil and so forth. Brought over kudzu, planted it, and it went crazy, right? The weed that ate the south kudzu. So it's impacting the forest, the ecosystem, all the species in that ecosystem, right? So it has a very strong impact on our ecological ecosystems, and then it also has another impact. Can you see this straight shape right here? Looks like a pup tent, somebody's house. Underneath the kudzu. So it also has a very strong economic impact. It will do damage to infrastructure, right? So it damages ecosystems, damages infrastructure. So this leads to two important parts of definition of invasive species. But kudzu does have one positive effect. You can create you can have a very nice dessert called kudzu mochi. I've never had it, but there it is. And I'm going to skip this one, but we all know the story of American chestnut, right? Introduced accidentally on an intentional introduction of Chinese chestnut, right? And killed off our native chestnut, right? So very strong impact on our ecosystems and our economy, because chestnuts were very important to people's sustenance and wildlife. And here were these beautiful trees, chestnut trees, quite large at one time. I don't know if you can see that, but here's another little bug. You're going to hear a lot more about this, a very tiny insect. And I'm not going to steal any of Lori's thunder or talk about that, but it can also wipe out a forest. So strong impact to ecology and economies, right? So if you like your spring beauties, and your yellow lady slippers, these trilliums, and just all your native plants generally, you like your wildlife, you like your hunting species, and your game species like deer, you are going to have to be concerned about invasive species because they are a threat to all these things. Not each species, but as in a whole, they're threatening all these things. So I want to focus in on one species in particular, wavy leaf grass. It's a new introduction. Oh, I clipped out my definition. There was one more thing I want to say. So, definition for invasive species. Species that is not native. It's introduced intentionally or accidentally and causes harm to ecosystems, economies, or directly to human beings. And I'll have to leave you hanging on this, but there's actually a plant species that will turn you into a flesh-dripping zombie. And I'm not talking about poison ivy, but something else. But we can talk about that another time. But there's other harm can be caused directly to humans by introduced invasive species. So wavy leaf grass is kind of a primary concern of mine right now. Invades forest understory, loves the shade, will cover the forest floor, choking out everything else. So all those little lovely herbs I showed you earlier would be impacted by wavy leaf where it is. This is it a little closer, and I'm sorry the screen is a little small, but again, pick up the fact sheet. Does everyone have the fact sheet yet? Yeah, and there's more back there. And that will help you identify this. It is a grass, so it can be a little cryptic to identify, but it is very distinguishable from other native grass species. Particularly, can you see this, the waviness in that leaf? That is a dead giveaway. Once you recognize the pattern of this waviness, you can't miss this plant. And then there's some other little characteristics I'll just touch on. It came from somewhere in Russia, somewhere near the Winter Olympic site of Sochi, on the eastern shore of the Black Sea. We don't know how it got here, but it suddenly appeared in Baltimore, or outside Baltimore in Maryland, a little state park, Patapsco Valley State Park. And they first found it in 1996, just a few little patches, and now it covers thousands of acres in Maryland. In a very short time. It has become quite a problem up there. These are all my known current sites, known sites now. In Virginia, we have about between 30 and 40 sites that we know about. So there's a big discussion, but also a lot of action happening to try to stop it from spreading any further, and if we're lucky, we might be able to actually eradicate it. And that's a goal that may or may not be possible, but I think, make every effort as if we could. We're still very early in the invasion stage of the species. And in Virginia, we probably have less than 500 acres of it, which doesn't sound like a lot to me. I come from Phragmites australis, a common reed, of invasive in the wetlands in the coastal plain. There are 12,000 acres of common reed in Virginia. We're not going to be able to get that out of here. Wavy leaf 500, sounds so bad to me. But APHIS, part of the USDA, did a risk assessment. They believe that wavy leaf could cover all this red area you see here, including southern Alaska, Puerto Rico, Hawaiian Islands, and pretty much everything east of the Mississippi. And does people here know stiltgrass?
Yeah.
This is worse.
This is worse?
This is worse. First of all, it puts out this lovely sticky goo on its seeds that allows it to attach to people, to your clothes, to your dog. Now, the researcher I work with, she had her graduate students pick all those seeds off. Believe it or not, this is what scientists do. Pick them off and count them. 12,000 seeds on poor Harley here in a 30-second run through a patch of wavy leaf. So imagine deer, bear, bunnies, mice, everything else carrying that. That's how it gets around. She did also test it on using deer legs she obtained from hunters and walked those through patches, and sure enough, not surprised it sticks to the deer. So again, this is a scene it can create, right? And you formerly might have had lots of different ferns, lots of understory ground cover flowering plants, boom, gone. Here it is in harmonious competition with Japanese stiltgrass. I say harmonious competition because they do push back and forth at each other, but wavy leaf likes the deeper shade, tends to like the deeper shade. Stiltgrass likes a little bit of light opening. They both add up to a lot of trouble for the forest understory, right? I know I'm running out of time. How am I doing with time?
Running out.
Running out? All right.
All too interesting.
So, quick. You're going to have to stop me because I could go on for 3 hours. So, here's a view of the whole plant. It has a very weak root. It is a perennial, so that's how it's different from stiltgrass. Stiltgrass is an annual, but it puts out a lot of seed, and those seeds can survive a long time in the soil before sprouting. We don't know about wavy leaf seeds. Right now we know last around 3 years, maybe longer. Bad enough, could be worse. And then the leaf, again, wavies, the waves of the leaf almost look like it's pleated, right? And you see that? And then they're very regular, the waves. And if you compare it to stiltgrass here, the leaf is larger, it's got the funny waves, and stiltgrass has a little silvery midrib running down the center of the leaf. Right? So those characters let you quickly distinguish it. A couple more.
I might mention carpet grass or arthrax.
Coming up.
Okay, great. All right.
And
Sorry.
So what are we going to do about it? How can
kill, crush, destroy.
Yeah.
I'll get to that.
About it? How are we going to get rid of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So stiltgrass again. I think I covered those characters. We do have a native. You can kind of confuse it with deer tongue. Deer tongue, the leaf is much larger. Doesn't have that regular wavy action going on. The base of the leaf on deer tongue looks like it's been pierced by the stem, or foliate they call that. The wavy leaf just sprouts off the side. Arthraxon, hispidus, also known as carpgrass, carpet grass, myriad other names. You can see it's a little bit smaller, first of all. It's a brighter green. It tends to like sunnier places, wetter places. So this will be in the deep shade. This will be in sunny, moist spots. So, and then it's not so regular in its waviness. It does have some waviness, but it's irregular. But then the dead giveaway for carpet grass is the hairs And did you expect to be hearing about the hairs on a leaf today? I don't know, but
Kevin, let me
Yep.
pull you to a close here.
Yep.
After we have our speakers, everybody who has spoken will be back at their table for
Yep.
a half an hour. But I'm wondering, is there some way that DCR could create a little video? You could create a little
There
video?
is a video on the Virginia Master Naturalist website. There was a webinar that Vanessa Beecham and I did when Alicia Kroll was here. So that's on the
On this particular item.
Yep.
So now we don't ask for, well, can you give us a brochure? We now want to look at it
It's all online.
online.
So
So
one last
I'll get
quick,
that information
one last
from you.
quick thing with the wavy leaf. I asked you can kill it by using glyphosate at the prescribed rate, pretty much the same as for stilt grass, a 2% rate. 2 treatments a year ideal. Late May, early June for the first one. That might be we might be able to push that off a little later in Virginia. We've discussed these dates with people in Maryland, and I'm seeing it here a little later, but 2 treatments good. You come in, hit it first, and then seedlings may come up after you kill the first round. So 2 treatments ideal. But if all you can do is one, do that one, but keep coming back for the next few years to make sure you got all the seeds.
Has it been found in Nelson?
It has been found in Nelson. I think I've got 2 sites in Nelson.
Doesn't that kill everything else?
What?
Doesn't that kill everything else too?
Well, what?
There's enough to kill it that way we
Yeah.
pass it.
If you let it go, you're not going to have anything else.
Would a grass-specific herbicide work?
You can use Envoy. It's a little more expensive in our test comparing Envoy with glyphosate. Glyphosate had a more effective kill. The native stuff, there's lots of seed out there. It's going to come back. You will kill other stuff, but if you use the proper rate, you're not going to harm your shrubs or trees. And a lot of the tougher herbs are not going to be affected, but there's a lot of propagules out there for our natives, so they'll come back. But if you let this go, there's going to be no competition. Even tree species will be suppressed by wavy leaf carpets. So,
Well, thank you for
Forest
that
structure.
good news.
last one. Look up. Oh, sorry, I don't have a picture for that. Never mind. Oh.
Good
When
news.
is the seed? What time of year?
August, September till frost. Yeah. Look for these apps. This will help you in all your invasive species work, but especially plants. Mid-Atlantic Early Detection Network app, that's on Apple and Android, and it'll help you ID plants and very important for me, help you map and report them. And then I get the information that goes to these apps, and particularly with something like wavy leaf, and we can maybe get help out to control that. There's also iNaturalist. Anyone know an iNaturalist? Both these apps are useful in reporting species, and that information gets to some of us who care and can do something. All right? Thank you for letting me go over a little bit. Thank you very
Well,
much.
and
for your
Kevin will be there. We're so glad to have Ray here to do his PowerPoint on the machine that he brought from us, because we're not so technically clever. So thank you, Ray, for contributing that as well. And the floor is yours. And let's feel sorry for Ray, because when he leaves here, he's going to end up in Maine.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to go through and give you a couple of definitions, repeating kind of what Kevin said in a couple of instances, because some of this stuff you need to hear more than once, and then take a little bit of a turn to talk about what are the general impacts of some of the invasive species, and then how determining what's an invasive species is really a matter of your perspective and where you're from, as Kevin alluded to. Of course, Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, we deal primarily with wildlife. I've tried to get more focus on plant communities, but we haven't really done that too much, except when they become a problem for the wildlife we're managing. So, to talk about invasive species, what is a non-indigenous species? And this is a term you're going to hear: non-indigenous, alien, exotic. All of these things depends on who's saying it, but they all mean pretty much the same thing in a common vernacular. A species that lives in the wild, but is not native to the ecosystem of area or area of concern. It's been introduced by man, either accidentally or intentionally. So anything that's, as Kevin said, that's not from here, but it's here now and is living in the wild. It's not just a cultivated landscape plant. It's escaped and it's living in the wild. So it's a non-indigenous species. In general discussion, non-indigenous, alien, exotic, and non-native might be used interchangeably. So you really need to think about context. Okay, so what's an invasive species? And this is actually part of a definition from a federal executive order. So this is the official federal government definition. An invasive species is a non-native plant, animal, or microbial species that causes or likely to cause economic or ecological harm or harm to human health. Okay? So that's the one you can take to the bank. Every other definition is kind of a derivation of this, one way or another. And at the bottom, I'm just listing a bunch of them. Okay, so what types of plants, animals are included? Well, virtually any type of animal or organism, from viruses, mammals, can be an invasive species. Kevin and I both work on the technical committee that advises the Virginia Invasive Species Working Group, and our invasive species management plan is very broad in that context. Why are invasive species such a big deal? Well, 4 points, for example. About 50,000 non-indigenous species have been estimated to be introduced to the United States, and they cause an estimated about $137 billion annually in damages and costs. About 5,000 introduced plant species have escaped and now live in U.S. natural ecosystems, and that's compared to only 17,000 native plants to begin with. About 400, or about half, of the endangered species currently listed as threatened or endangered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are considered to be at risk primarily because of competition with invasive species, about 50, almost 50%. And finally, this is actually a little excerpt from a thing I did for a legal seminar. So where they were dealing with permitting and endangered species permitting. Many of the regulatory and permitting requirements that anybody goes under, whether you're a local government, state government, regional government, county commission, whatever, a lot of the regulatory issues you deal with regarding endangered species touch on invasive species and control of invasive species in one way or another. If you have to get a permit from the Corps of Engineers nowadays, you might have to deal with how you're going to handle the invasive species that come onto your property. If you want to set up a conservation easement on your property, you may have to come up with a plan to how you're going to develop invasive species or control them. Who are the players? I'm not going to name all these, just say that there's a whole bunch of them. I think a lot of the groups here, basically you're talking about federal government, regional government, state government, local government, and an awful lot of work by NGOs. With the way government budgets are going these days, NGOs are becoming more and more and more active and important. Particularly groups like Nature Conservancy, Conservation Foundation, Master Naturalists, Native Plant Society, the Rockfish Valley Foundation, PRISM, all these groups, a lot of which are represented here. I mentioned the Virginia Invasive Species Management Plan. Kevin is kind of the lead on this project. It's been done twice. We're updating it again now. But basically, this is a fairly standard protocol for how you deal with them. And the main steps in most of these plans nationwide are interagency coordination, prevention of invasions, early detection of invasions, rapid response to invasions and newly detected populations. And I might just throw in a little caveat there. Rapid response is one of those things that needs a little bit of context. If you talk to me a little bit about this Millbrook Quarry situation, rapid response meant 3 years of studying the problem and getting federal and state permits to deal with it, followed by 3 weeks of actual treatment to eradicate the problem. Wow. That's a true case. I've got a paper for you. Control and management of species, research and risk assessment, and then education and outreach. Okay. Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, as I said, we're a regulatory agency, we're the hunting and fishing agency, we're the boating agency, we're a watchable wildlife agency. We have 2 laws basically that allow us to handle invasive species. One is called our Predatory and Undesirable Species Regulation. What that does pretty much is say that if you want to bring something that's not native to Virginia into the state, if we've put it on a dirty list, if you will, as something that could be dangerous if it got into the wild, you have to get a permit from us to bring it into the state. We virtually never issue a permit to bring it into the state, unless you're a researcher and you have a confined laboratory, for example. Prior to the passage of the next bill I'll discuss, this was virtually our only law, our only way of addressing invasive species. Well, when we got zebra mussels in 2002, And part of dealing with how to handle that was to get this bill passed. And that was the Virginia Non-Indigenous Aquatic Nuisance Species Act. Bill was passed in 2003, primarily to authorize us to go on people's property and deal with invasive species and emergencies. Wildlife species, not plant species. It only covers wildlife. And what this does is basically it gives the Department of Game and Fisheries authority to name which species are non-indigenous aquatic nuisance species, and there are about 7 or 8 of them on the list now, plus all of the snakehead fishes. And then it allows us to get warrants to go on anybody's property, do whatever we have to do to eradicate them if it's one of these species, and if the landowner doesn't cooperate with us, they can be liable for up to $25,000 per instance, which, by the way, could mean $25,000 per zebra mussel. And so it's pretty powerful if it happens. What are the issues with invasive species? So I'm going to go pretty quickly now. You already talked about habitat displacement, whether it's, and I'm going to, in all these slides, kind of go clockwise from the upper right, whether you're talking about water chestnut, kudzu, or beach vitex, these are some of the species that can just totally dominate perform a monoculture. Habitat destruction or disturbance, they can either cause, an invasive species can either cause the damage itself, or an invasive species can invade an area that's been damaged through other means. So for example, in the upper right, this is a marsh that's been destroyed by nutria. That used to be a freshwater marsh. This was pictures from Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge. It's recovered since then. This picture was taken in the early 90s. Nutria have been eradicated from the marsh. It's now a beautiful marsh again. On the bottom left, you got feral hogs, and this isn't an agricultural operation. This is feral hogs in a native environment and the damage that they did. And then on the right, you just see a bulldozing situation where invasive species can come into disturbed areas. See a lot of signs, and I'm not going to go political here, but I've seen a lot of signs coming into the meeting today about no ACP, no pipeline, stuff like this. One of the issues that's trying to be dealt with there is when you bring in the long construction project, that's an avenue for invasion by a lot of these species if you're not very careful about how you do it. And one of the things we're focusing on is making sure that they are careful if it happens. Damage to infrastructure, equipment, and crops. Zebra mussel situations on the right. On the left, this is hog damage in one night on the farmer's property. Direct impacts on wildlife species and communities. Upper right, you've got zebra mussels smothering a native freshwater mussel. On the lower right, we have a native species called the yellow-bellied slider, a native turtle. It's being damaged ecologically and genetically by the red-eared slider, which is the turtle that everybody used to buy as a pet when they were a kid. Been released. They interbreed with these. They're destroying the genetics and destroying our native species. This is a blue catfish that's gorged itself on native mussels. Again, remember blue catfish, trophy fisheries for my own agency. What am I bad-mouthing blue catfish for? Well, in one situation, they might be a trophy fish. In another situation, they could really devastate native mussel communities. Introduction of transmission of disease to livestock, wildlife, or humans. Feral pigs can transmit diseases to humans or to wildlife or to domestic crops. We have feral cats feeding with black vultures. A lot of disease transmission going on there as well. Diseases of feral swine. Too many to mention. Believe me, these are some of the nastiest creatures on the face of the earth in terms of disease transmission to humans, pets, wildlife, etc. Got a lot of information about that. Probably the #1 invasive species of terrestrial mammal in the country right now. $20 million being spent by the USDA. Our program is a cooperative effort between the Department of Game and Fisheries and the USDA Wildlife Services to get rid of this species. Proximity of invasive species to sensitive communities. We talked about zebra mussels and some of the others, but who would like to have a bunch of 20-pound rats, if you will, feeding in their backyard or on their golf course? Those are nutria in the upper right. Bottom line, I just like this slide. Okay, we don't have many pythons, we don't have many alligators in Virginia, but I'm from South Florida, so I love this slide of the Burmese python wrestling an alligator. We already talked about stilt grass. transport of invasive species to or from a project site. As I mentioned, one of the things we're dealing with in the permitting and the review coordination for the pipeline. On boats, on equipment, on your waders, on your boots, and in firewood, primary methods of transmission. What are some of the alternatives? You can get out there and survey and monitor them, either plants. This is Brian Watson and I that was surveying this water chestnut on the right, surveying for other animals. Control or eradication through prescribed fire, treatment with chemicals such as Millbrook Quarry, treatment with pesticides, removal of invasive species and soils. Again, you've got some places are actually using goats as grazers to get rid of invasive species throughout the mid-Atlantic and some other states and other countries. You can dig them up, you can harvest them through for water chestnut. And then decontamination of your gear, whether it's a boat, logging equipment, whatever your equipment is. And restoration of habitats, such as creating better pollinator habitats in replacement of after you get rid of the invasives. And decontamination of boats and trailers. This is a big deal nationwide now. Primarily got its kickstart with the 100th Meridian Initiative to kind of keep zebra mussels from escaping from the eastern half of the United States to the western half. It failed. They're all over. They're out to California now, but they're still slowing the spread through boat trailer inspection and decontamination. It's a lot easier to do, I would say, though, in a state, a dry state with a half a dozen lakes and 7 or 8 boat ramps. Okay? In Virginia, our agency alone manages about 250 boat ramps. We've got huge numbers of lakes in the state of Virginia. States that only manage it on 15 to 20 sites are spending anywhere from $3 to $10 million per year for these types of boat inspection programs. They can be effective, but they're very expensive. And then educational programs and materials, as you've seen a lot of that. Get back to the beginning, and I'll run through these real quick. What's an invasive species? Is it a problem for you? It's primarily a matter of your perspective, where you're from, where the species is. For example, this is one of my favorite plants anyway right now in terms of this stuff. Invasive species or endangered species. This is a plant that only occurs basically at Fort A.P. Hill in Virginia and a couple of other places up in New Jersey and New York. Only places it's been found in the U.S. It's been put there intentionally basically by carnivorous plant enthusiasts because this is actually a carnivorous plant. It eats little larvae and insects. And it's endangered throughout its native range in the old world. So people who like this plant are bringing it here saying, we're doing a great thing. We're saving an endangered species. But it's creating a problem for us. Blue catfish, invasive species or trophy fishery. It depends on what state you're from, what county you're from, what water body you're talking about. Invasive species or companions, feral cats. Some people love them, some people hate them. I'm on the hater side, but you know, it is what it is. Northern snakehead, terrific game fish, terrific meal, terribly invasive or terribly competitive, shall we say. I can get into day-long arguments with my own staff about whether this species is a horrible invasive species or whether it's just a very, 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 very good competitor. Depends on your perspective. Invasive species or recreational commercial game species. Feral hogs, as I said, are our biggest problem in terms of a terrestrial mammal in the country now, and certainly in Virginia. Landscape species or landscape decoration or invasive species. Mute swans. They're an invasive, they're a very aggressive, large bird that can certainly harm other wildlife. We're doing everything we can to get rid of them, but some people like to keep them as pets in their hotel ponds. Hydrilla and milfoil, invasive species or valuable SAV habitat. I have arguments now with some of our own staff on areas of the Potomac River where we want to restore marshes, and yet some of our own biologists are saying, but that's the only fisheries habitat we have in the river. It's all a matter of your perspective. And the next big thing, of course, you know, whether you're talking about West Nile virus or Zika, another invasive species, And of course, we've all seen the stuff about snakeheads. So that's all I have.
All right, good afternoon. So I coordinate the Forest Health Program at the Virginia Department of Forestry. So I thought first I'd just start by telling you all what we do in the Forest Health Program. And so we have a couple of program priorities. Our main priority is probably to survey and monitor Virginia for major forest pests, pathogens, invasive plants, and other disturbances. And we do this through a variety of different ways. We set traps throughout the state to monitor for specific insect populations. And so here you can see one of our traps for the southern pine beetle. We do this trapping every spring to monitor the southern pine beetle's population. We also do ground and aerial surveys. So if there's a large insect outbreak that's causing damage over many, many acres of forest land, then we'll go up in a small plane and we'll try to map out that damage. More recently, we've started using satellite imagery to monitor the canopy, and that just helps us monitor the greenness of the canopy to detect any large forest disturbances. Another big program priority is to summarize all of this data that we collect and make it available upon request to interested parties. And so we send all of our survey data to the U.S. Forest Service every year, and then we also publish a Forest Health Review publication at the end of each year. And this just summarizes the forest health issues that we've dealt with over the year. And I have a few copies over on the table over there, but you can always download this from our website, the DOF website, under the Publication tab. And then finally, we try to provide outreach and assistance to our foresters, to private forestry consultants, and to Virginia landowners. And so we're always available for outreach and education. And one of our big events that we put on is the Virginia Association of Forest Health Professionals Conference. That happens at the beginning of every year. So this year it will be in January, or I guess the following year it will be in January 2018 in Stanton, Virginia. And this is a two-day conference. We bring in speakers from all over to talk about current forest health issues, emerging forest health issues, and new kind of treatment strategies and methods to deal with them. All right, so I thought there's a ton of different forest health issues I could talk about, but I thought I would focus on the emerald ash borer today because that's kind of the hot topic in this area. The emerald ash borer is a beetle that's native to Asia. It was first found in the United States in 2002 in Michigan, and then it was first found in Virginia in Fairfax in 2003. And at that point, the Department of Agriculture and then a bunch of partnering agencies really jumped on that infestation, and they were able to eradicate it from Virginia at that time. Unfortunately, 5 years later, it reappeared in Virginia in 2008, back in Fairfax, and at that point, it was here to stay. The emerald ash borer infests all ash trees that are native to this area. So if there is an ash tree here that becomes infested, it will die. This is the life cycle of this beetle. Adults are active in the spring and early summer, and they fly around the tops of ash trees and they feed on the foliage. And then they lay eggs on the bark of the ash tree, in the crevices of the bark. And when those eggs hatch, the larvae bore into the tree. And they feed on the plant tissue just underneath the bark of the tree. And so that feeding is actually what kills the tree. They end up girdling the tree, effectively killing it. They pupate in the spring, and then the adults emerge again the following spring to start the cycle all over again. So here are some signs of the emerald ash borer that you can look out for. If you're able to peel the bark off the tree, you can look for S-shaped galleries, and that's where the larvae are boring and feeding on the plant tissue just beneath the bark. You can also look for D-shaped exit holes. When the adults emerge from the tree, they create this D-shaped hole about the size of a pencil eraser. And it's D-shaped because the shape of the insect, they're flat on the top of the head. So it won't be a circle, it'll be shaped like a D. You can also look for epicormic shoots. These are just sprouts coming off the trunk of the tree, and that's a sign that the tree is stressed. And then another good sign that a tree has been infested by the emerald ash borer is bark stripping by woodpeckers. Woodpeckers are predators of the emerald ash borer, so they strip the bark of the tree trying to get to the larvae. And it's really distinct once you see it. I'm not sure this is a great picture with the lighting, but it just looks like bark has been stripped off in places. So this is a map of where emerald ash borer is in the United States. It started in Michigan, and it's definitely creeping down to the southern states. I think currently about 30 states are infested. And this is where we know it is in Virginia. These are the counties that have been confirmed to be positive for the emerald ash borer. Now, this doesn't mean that they're not in other counties. These are just counties where we have definitely confirmed it by collecting an insect specimen. So the good news is we don't have a ton of ash in Virginia. Forest inventory analysis data tells us that only about 1.8% of our forest land is composed of ash. So it's always devastating to lose a species, but that's not going to be a huge part of our forest land that we lose. Most of that ash is white ash and green ash, but there are other minor species as well. All right, so what can you do if you have an ash tree in your yard that you want to save? Because there are ways to protect ash trees. There's chemical insecticides. So if you have a yard tree that you'd like to save, there are a couple different ways to do that. The most effective insecticide is something that would have to be injected into the tree, and that would have to be done by a certified arborist. If you want to do something yourself, there's a chemical that you can purchase at probably like Lowe's or a garden supply store, and that's what you see right here. It's a soil drench. And so you basically just pour that around the base of the tree, and the roots of the tree take it up. This one, the one you can do yourself, does have to be reapplied every year. The one that an arborist can inject into your tree, that's the most effective, and that probably needs to be reapplied every 2 to 3 years. Now, obviously, treating every single ash tree in a forest setting isn't really practical, but there is biological control. So there are wasps in Asia, where the emerald ash borer is native, that feed on the beetle in those areas. And so after years and years of studying these wasps in quarantine areas and making sure that they don't feed on anything other than the target host, we have been releasing them. There are a couple different types. Some parasitize the eggs of the emerald ash borer, and some parasitize the larvae of the emerald ash borer. The problem is getting populations of these wasps established. It's really difficult to do that. So this map shows all the areas where there have been releases of these parasitoid wasps, but we just haven't been able to get them to establish a critical population capable of controlling the emerald ash borer. In fact, last week we just did a release at Cumberland State Forest. And so I don't know if you can see, but in this cup are like 100 of those tiny, tiny little wasps. And so we actually released 800 at Cumberland State Forest, and we'll release them again every year for the next 3 years to try to get them to establish a population. Do I have a couple more minutes, or should I stop here?
Do these wasps sting?
No.
That's good to know. And can homeowners get them?
It would be difficult for a homeowner to get them, but if you have a large area of forest land that you think would be good for a release, let us know. Yeah.
Well, if they only eat the borers and they're ultimately effective, that's their own demise.
Yes. So the goal would be they would level out the emerald ash borer population, and then they wouldn't be able to increase in their population either. So eventually there would be this equilibrium, a lower emerald ash borer population living with these parasitoid wasps.
Yeah, I can tell you that on my property, the tree is the green ash, and we have arranged to have them treated, and it's very expensive. But it's about 80% of the trees on our 2-acre homestead.
What does an ash tree look like? So I know when I see it.
There's a pamphlet back here at the table. Come look. But it has opposite branching. That's the way that I tell it. So instead of alternate branching, the branches will come out oppositely.
So this is the brochure that Lori brought. So go into the office of DOF there in Charlottesville off of, what is it called?
Fontaine, yes.
Fontaine. You get off at 29, go around to all the UVA hospitals, but take the long road. Everybody probably knows the building, but they've got an amazing amount of giveaway stuff. So thank you for being here and for being here afterwards. And yeah, I think we could use a few pails of wasp around here.
I don't have time to go into this one, but stop by and take a look at it. This is an invasive insect that is not yet here in Virginia, but it's in some of the surrounding states. So we're just trying to increase awareness about it and keep it out of Virginia. And there's a sample you can look at on the table.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Corey. I work for Natural Resources Conservation Service. It's a small agency within USDA. I've heard it described as the paint on the end of the board as far as the size of USDA. My office is based in Louisa. I do live in Albemarle, though my counties are Albemarle and Nelson. So anytime I can come down here and spend time with you all, I'm happy to do so and not have to drive to Louisa. So we're basically a technically based agency. I meet with landowners all the time. People call me with just general questions, land management questions, invasive species, grass identification, nutrient management. We do a little bit of a lot. So I'm no expert in anything, but we work with livestock producers, crop producers, rural landowners, backyard conservationists. It runs the gambit. It doesn't cost you anything. You've already paid for the service whether you use it or not, and we're non-regulatory. So a lot of times we're kind of the first folks call when they see an obvious land management issue. But today I guess I'm here to talk about invasive species, and whether I realized it earlier in my career or not, we were all dealing with invasive species on every property in every different landscape. And while many of the programs that I work with have specific focuses, water quality being one of those, we are more often incorporating some sort of invasive species control in our plans and dealing with our projects. Anytime there's a land use change, there's an opportunity for an invasive species. Anytime there's the slightest management change of a particular piece of property, there's an opportunity for an invasive species to take advantage of that situation. And it could be something as simple as, I don't bush hog right up to the edge like I used to. But those edges are where we're seeing a lot of things, moving in. The field's not getting smaller, it's just changing on the edges a lot of times. Of course, avoidance is great, but unfortunately that's just not realistic any longer. We all have these pest plants. So having awareness is probably the biggest first step, which is why we're all here today. In working with landowners with invasive species issues, this is some of the things that I've observed, and trying to work through a plan of action. These are some of the things that I've noticed. First of all is have a plan of action. You know, you need to consider all methods of control for all species before you take anything off the board. I know there's a lot of hesitation of herbicides in different communities for good reason. Have that awareness. Don't necessarily take it off of the table because it is an effective, efficient, economic tool. And if you only have to use it once to do a lot of the heavy lifting initially, the overall benefit may be greater than any kind of detrimental impacts you're having. There are going to be limitations. Time, money, labor, willingness to use certain types of control. So, and there are other options, you know, depending on landscape, the lay of the land, the invasives that you're trying to get rid of. So, you know, that's why a lot of these technical experts are here to go through all those options with you. Don't be afraid to take small bites. Don't feel like you have to do it all at once. You're going to wear yourself out pretty quick. It's going to get discouraging. It's going to be just generally overwhelming. So, you know, you can focus on specific species. You can focus on specific areas of control. You can focus on just trying to knock out the simple things maybe in a different time of year. So those are all considerations. Be as selective as possible, when possible. It's typically more efficient overall with less collateral damage. And then last but not least, you know, once you've considered all of that, developed your plan, know what you're going to be left with. Have a plan of action after the fact. We all know what happens when you have bare ground. You know, introduce some temporary cover, competing vegetation. These are all options. And basically be ready for some seasonal mopping up, because just because you've gotten a lot of that heavy lifting done, you're not done. You're not done. So that's basically what I had today. There are programs available. Some are funded differently, some are funded different times a year. But again, you know, we do work with livestock producers, watering systems, forage management plans. We do get into some reforestation of areas, invasive species control, wildlife habitat development. We do a little bit of a lot. So give us a call, and yeah, we're here to help.
And I'll just give you a personal story. When we found out about this pocket of money through PRISM, actually, the Rockfish Valley Foundation has one of the most successful kudzu growth areas in the county. And it's been sort of good news because it's been there since probably the late 30s, early 40s, and it's been protecting our archaeology site. And so now we're getting closer to wanting to study and interpret the archaeology site. We've got to get rid of the invasives. And so we learned that we could do this paperwork, and hats off to Corey. He's got the patience of Job to go through all of this paperwork to get things qualified. And we got a small amount of money, which we have hired the next speaker to come in to our archaeology site and attack Alanthus, kudzu, and believe it or not, wisteria. Wisteria has pretty much killed all the trees. Wisteria looks nice in a Greek taverna or something, but you put it in a piece of land like an archaeology site, it's devastating. So I know firsthand the resources and the knowledge that Corey brings. So after this is over, word to the wise, learn more about what he does, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So when you kind of think about what we've heard, over 45 minutes is a lot out there. I think we're really blessed that somebody came up with the idea of founding an organization that could help make it easier for us. And that's what PRISM's all about. So Ashton, if you want to come up, let everybody know what PRISM's about and the resources you've got over there to give away, then we'll end our program. Of course, we'll give away a few books. But this is the resource, and I'm sorry that the genius behind creating the organization is, where is he, fishing somewhere?
He's in Canada, but you got me instead. I'm sorry.
We're delighted to have Ashton, but Rod Walker and his wife sort of came up with this idea, and so he deserves to go fishing. But the floor is yours.
Everyone's got to go fishing every now and then. I said, so then you can come back refreshed to do this work. I'm Ashton Fisher. I'm the program director of the Blue Ridge PRISM, and PRISM stands for Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. And before I dive into my talk, I'd like to say thank you to Peter so much for organizing this event. This is wonderful, and thank you to all the partners that are here. We work very closely with a lot of the partners that are here in the room, and they're invaluable resources, and they're just good people to work with too. I live in Charlottesville, but I'm originally from Richmond, and I love coming down to Nelson County. I just think there's something really special about Nelson County. I grew up snowboarding at Wintergreen a lot, so I'd always drive through Nelson, and so it's very nice to be meeting the folks in the community here. I printed out my PowerPoint instead of having it on the screen, so I'm gonna go from here. So I'll give you a little bit about my background and the PRISM's background, how we were founded, and also services that we offer to landowners, and some more information about how to get involved. So my background, I was a director at an international nonprofit in Richmond, among a few other things. And then recently, last year, I was working for a conservation corps out in Arizona. And so out west was where I really got some great insight into the work that goes into conservation. And it was a lot of 10 hours a day, working 8 days straight, doing a lot of chainsaw work, getting rid of these invasives. So I have a deep appreciation for the work that goes into the land management that y'all are here to learn about today. So the PRISM was founded about 2.5 years ago, and one of the co-founders, as Peter mentioned, was Rod Walker. So Rod and his wife Maggie they purchased land in Albemarle County about 16 years ago, and they noticed a little teeny vine, but didn't think much about it. And it had really beautiful red berries that they would decorate their house with. And flash forward 16 years later, did you all see this vine in the back of the room? So that is Oriental bittersweet. So now, someone mentioned about, the earlier you get on these invasive species, the better. And also, it's a long-term commitment as well. So when Rod saw this bittersweet on a large piece of property that he owns, he prioritized it because it was threatening to take down the canopy of his forest. And since the forest took so long to build that canopy, what better invasive to prioritize than that bittersweet? So when Rod was treating all this Oriental bittersweet on his property, he eventually reached the point, as you all may have, where you look to your borders and you realize I can defend, I can treat, I can manage invasives on my property all day long, but if I don't work with my neighbors, then you're just gonna be defending your borders all day long. So his neighbor happened to be the Shenandoah National Park. So he called the park and got in touch with Jake Hughes, who is the exotics plant manager for the Shenandoah National Park. And they started to talk about big picture, how do we manage invasives on a larger scale? How do we partner with landowners and partner with other agencies to really make an impact in the region. And the right vehicle for this was a cooperative weed management area. So what is a CWMA? We've got a lot of acronyms in this environmental world, so I'll make sure I spell them all out. So a cooperative weed management area is more commonly found in the western part of the country. And when I was out working in Arizona, we did in fact work with a lot of CWMAs, and a lot of them out there, we've got bigger bodies of land. So it's collaborations between Department of Forestry and BLM or Nature Conservancy. So you have a small amount of partners and a large amount of land, which sounds like a pretty nice way to manage, especially invasives. So out east, where we are the first cooperative weed management in Virginia, the Blue Ridge PRISM is, and we are working with about 40,000 landowners, which has its own unique challenge, but we're here because we believe that it's worth it and that we're making progress in the right direction. So where is the Blue Ridge PRISM? We are based in Charlottesville, but we try not to be too Albemarle County centric. We have a 10-county region in the northern Blue Ridge. So the south, I can actually read all counties to you, but they start in Nelson is our southernmost county, and then we've got Albemarle and Augusta County moving north, Greene, Rockingham, Madison, Page, Rappahannock, Warren, and Clark counties. And that's about 2.8 million acres in the northern Blue Ridge. So, what invasives do we focus on? As Peter mentioned earlier, we do have fact sheets at our table at the end of the room. So you'll find 15 fact sheets right on the table. So 12 of them are plant specific. So what does that mean? They are our 12 targeted invasive plants, and those fact sheets have really great information. They're front and back, so they're easy to read, and they're about how to identify and how to manage these invasives. And I'll go ahead, I guess, and address the herbicide thing since everyone is mentioning them as well. So I personally do not choose and do not desire to consume a vegetable that has glyphosate on it. I don't want it in my body. That's my personal, this is not a PRISM policy, this is my personal philosophy. But I think that there's a really good point to be made about understanding herbicides, and that's one of the things that we do as the Blue Ridge PRISM. We want to educate landowners that you're making the best choice to manage your property the way that you choose to do so. That being said, there are herbicides that are soil active, so they're going to be herbicides that target legumes, and when you spray them, they will continue to be active in the soil. So glyphosate, for example, is not a soil active herbicide. And my husband works for another contractor, Virginia Forestry and Wildlife Group, y'all may know them. And they wanted to do their own tests outside the studies about glyphosate. So what they did is they treated an area with glyphosate, and then they went back a year later to test what the soil activity was. And I believe there was about 0.0001% of the herbicide that was still in the soil. So I just thought that was a very powerful illustration. Not only that some of these herbicides do break down, but also, has anyone tried to treat ailanthus without using a chemical to poison it? Does anyone know what happens when you try and cut down a ailanthus tree and you don't poison it? Right, you've got about 100 times the problem that you started with. 1 million. So you get all these little, what the tree does, it's very good and very resilient, and it sends up all these little suckers everywhere. So now instead of having one tree, you've got 30, 40, 50, hundreds of little sprouts everywhere. Okay, so that's my tangent there. So our top invasive species that we prioritize, there's 12 of them. Ailanthus. The vines include Oriental bittersweet, Mile-a-minute vine, kudzu, porcelain berry, Japanese honeysuckle. The shrubs are autumn olive and multiflora rose and Chinese privet. And the ground covers, the herbaceous plants, are Japanese silkgrass, wavy leaf basket grass, and garlic mustard. So when I joined the Blue Ridge PRISM, I'm the first hire of the organization, so I do a little bit of everything. And I was very impressed by the fact that the PRISM was run by volunteers, and it was a bunch of very passionate individuals, such as yourselves, that were doing the bulk heavy lifting of the organization. So that was one component of why the PRISM has gained traction in our region and we've accomplished so much in such a short period of time. The other reason is because of our partners. And a lot of those partners are in this room today. So again, I just want to say thank you to all our partners. The fact sheets that you see in the back of the room, they are authored by a woman named Susan Roth, but they're also vetted by all of our partners. So our steering committee they're big players in the region, and they're continually advising us on where we should be as an organization and what we should be focusing on, and that, I believe it's that synergy between all of our partners really gives us a good grasp on what's going on in the region and how PRISM can best fit into that picture. So a little bit about the administration of the PRISM, how we work. Those volunteers that I alluded to, they are broken up into about a handful of different working groups. So that's our Area Steward Program, our Early Detection and Rapid Response Working Group, Education and Outreach, Grants and Fundraising, IT and Marketing, Prevention and Research.
So Ashton, if one of these people call you up and say, what can you do for me? How do you respond?
That's a great question. So, yes, that's the main point to this. So the Blue Ridge PRISM, we believe that education and outreach is a huge need in the community, and it's really great. That's the main way to educate people about the things that we have going on when it comes to invasive species. So I've got 3 events for you to write down, or 3 things, ways to get involved with PRISM. So right now we're currently putting on a training series for landowners. So we are at the tail end of our summer training series on Thursday, June 29th, that's this coming Thursday, in Harrisonburg at JMU's Arboretum. We are doing a training for landowners on invasive species management. It's from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and we'll go through all of the 12 invasive species that we have on our list, how to identify them, how to manage them. We'll take you out into the field, we'll show you how to manage them, and what we're doing is we're going to do these training series once a season. So we'll have another series coming up in October. Also, we have our quarterly meeting that's going to be on July 22nd, and this time it's going to be in Rappahannock County, but normally they're at Ivy Creek. The 3rd event that I have for you, so Kevin spoke about wavy leaf basket grass. There's a very large infestation of wavy leaf basket grass in the Shenandoah National Park. And unfortunately, with federal budgets, they don't have the resources to treat it. So we have 4 volunteer days. They're on Saturdays and Sundays. And those dates are June 8th and 9th, and June 29th and 30th. So part of the treatment is using herbicides, part of it is not using herbicides. We need as many hands as we can get, as many boots on the ground to help get this problem under control, because as Kevin mentioned, if we don't get this ground zero under control, it's going to have a big effect for folks all around, you know, the northern Blue Ridge and further.
Was that June or July? Because you said 8th
Did I say
and 9th.
June? I meant July. July 8th and 9th. Those are dates that have already passed, right? July 8th and 9th and 29th and 30th. If you go to our Facebook page, we have those events on our Facebook page. And we do have a sign-up sheet in the back of the room on our table for our email list. That is the best way to keep in touch with what we have going on with our events in the region. So another way to get involved with PRISM and another service that we offer is our area stewardship program. So as I mentioned, when Rod was starting to defend his borders and look to his neighbors to collaborate, that is the founding principle with the Area Stewards program. So what we would like to do is get neighbors together to start talking about invasives, start organizing work days, and PRISM will help you facilitate how to build community around this idea of treating invasives. So our dream is to have islands of invasive-free areas, or at least areas where neighbors are actively managing invasives together. And then the last way to get involved with PRISM is speaking engagements. We love coming and talking to community groups. We love doing tabling events. It's really a good way for us to get out into the community and to start talking to people. And a little side note too, our quarterly meeting that's in Rappahannock County is in Rappahannock County partially because there's been a lot of interest in Rappahannock County. There's a lot of concerned community members that would like to potentially start a PRISM group in Rappahannock County. It would be under the same Blue Ridge PRISM umbrella. But they want more. They want more events. They want more training. So if that's anything that Nelson County is interested in, let me know. We would love to have a community meeting and really start brainstorming on how do we focus on Nelson County and who's going to help become the leaders to get that done. So I think that's about all I have. Another side note too. So Peter mentioned the funding that you all got. That is the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and that is funding through the Natural Resources Conservation Service. It's already been spoken for, but that was awarded to the Blue Ridge PRISM to allocate to landowners in our 10-county region, and we've recently applied for another round of funding.
Right.
So it's still too early to know. We've sent in our pre-approval, and we'll get a notice from them saying, please send in your full proposal or don't send in your full proposal. So it's still in the infancy stages, but we love to be able to provide you with financial resources to do this work. So
And money can go to a county, can it?
So
or does that have to go to a landowner?
it goes to a landowner. It can go to an organization, although I believe that's more complicated that way. You probably may have encountered that. But at the end of the day, I'd be willing to bet that it's probably worth it.
Because as we drive down 151, we see, and now that you are concentrating more, you'll see areas. Gosh, look at the kudzu right across from the VDOT holding place there at Bryant. Gosh, they ought to be able to attack that. So maybe with the education that we brought here today, as it expands out, I see Susan McSwain's mind working. There are ways for us to build this, you know, whether it's with our supervisor or whatever. We can find 3 or 4 places that we want to get rid of the invasives. So, I mean, I don't know where this can all lead, but it starts with education. We're blessed to have PRISM online and there. I hope you all realize that this is a pretty significant gathering here today, and we all should take advantage of the next step. So thank you for making it possible for us.